Well, everybody, I want to do a quick introduction of our speaker today. Dr. Patrick McBride, I think you go by Pat, right? Yeah. Spent his medical career at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health, publishing over 200 journal articles, abstracts, book chapters, medical education, heart disease prevention, etc. He received numerous teaching awards. He led a research program funded by the National Institutes of Health, focusing on heart disease and prevention, cholesterol management, and others. He also was the UW School of Medicine and Public Health Associate Dean of Students, and later the Associate Dean for Faculty. Sounds like a pretty successful career, but wait till you hear the rest of the story. In his teens, Pat worked for the Milwaukee Bucks, Green Bay Packers, and the Milwaukee Brewers from 1970 to 1976. He worked inside the locker rooms of all three professional sports teams, and at the age of 18 became the youngest equipment manager and assistant trainer in the professional sports history when he was named to those positions by the world champion Milwaukee Bucks in 1971. Here to share his personal journey from growing up in a dysfunctional home to professional sports to becoming a successful medical doctor with some interesting stories from his book, The Luckiest Boy in the World, please welcome Dr. Pat McBride.
What a privilege to be here. I really appreciate your time and having me here. Good.
You're tall.
All right. Yeah. They say I'm tall and that's all. But Joe, is Joe your name? You're moving to Tosa? Yeah, you have a great mayor. He's my twin brother, so you should be good. He's my co-author on this tale of woe. So when I set out to write this story, I was just going to write about my stories about sports and hanging out with a few famous people, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Henry Aaron, Joe DiMaggio, Ray Nitschke, Bart Starr. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to tell the whole story. And I said, no, I really don't want to go into the story. He said, no, you really need to tell the whole story. And I'll tell you the whole story, but not we'll do it in a short version. So I want to tell you about how 25 words and a phone call completely changed my life. So my twin brother and I are completely polar opposite personalities. People, you're lucky because he's a fantastic guy, fantastic mayor, very dedicated guy. So I'll tell you the story. And let me see how I can advance this here. Whoops, that's not working. Let me get out of that just a second. There we go. Yeah, I tried that and I got this box. There we go. So let me see if I can. I'll do it down here. Okay, that should work, right? There we go. All right. So this is your mayor, Bill, young guy. So this is my twin brother Dennis, and he's a short guy, and he's 6 inches shorter, and he's a heck of a lot smarter than I am. And he was a alderman for 12 years, and he's a lawyer. You know, those lawyers, those darn lawyers, you know. I'm trying. Aaron's here, so I gotta try. He went to NYU and Princeton. He's a smart guy. So I went to lowly UWM in Madison and all that kind of stuff. Great guy. So here we are as young guys. That's me telling the mayor what to do there, which is kind of silly because he was a 4-time letter winner as a pitcher. I was not. He was a 4-time letter winner as a track and cross country star. So he had 12 letters in college, and he's in the Athletic Hall of Fame at UW Milwaukee. And I was not. So I shouldn't be telling him what to do at all. But we were very interesting young twins. I wanted to be a cowboy, of course, like every other kid growing up. And this is kind of happier times. Growing up in Wauwatosa, Den, and I actually grew up not very far apart, just 6 blocks away. Wauwatosa was an interesting suburb at the time. Unbeknownst to us as kids, Wauwatosa had zoning laws where African-Americans couldn't live in Wauwatosa. And my mother was a social justice advocate, a politician at the time. She ran JFK's campaign. And we worked on JFK's campaign in 1959. And when she found out about that, she called somebody named Val Phillips. And Val Phillips came over to our house and was working, and we were little guys. And I remember looking through the banister at this powerful little figure named Val Phillips. I worked on the Val Phillips statue committee, and we have a statue going up. She'll be the first African-American woman to have a statue at a state capitol anywhere in the United States. And she was a powerhouse. The first time she left our house, her husband picked her up in the car and she left our house. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang and a neighbor came over and said, Marion, I just want to let you know in Wauwatosa, the help leaves by the back door. And my mother said, I just wanted you to know that at my house, my friends leave by the front door and close the door. It's like, that was our first powerful lesson of social justice. I think my twin brother never forgot that. And my mother worked very hard to get the zoning law changed, and it got changed. And we all worked very hard on a lot of different campaigns after that. So my career trying to become a cowboy, that in the back row, that's me with the cowboy hats. I'm not staring at what you think I'm staring at. I'm staring at Roy Rogers' gun there. And that's my twin next to me there without the cowboy hat. So we had great opportunities. Both my parents were journalists. They wrote for the Milwaukee Journal, and my mother wrote for the Milwaukee Sentinel. You might remember, anybody that grew up in Milwaukee might remember the Green Sheet. My dad wrote for the Green Sheet. He wrote 2 columns, one for Vietnam veterans, Vietnam soldiers who were there, and he wrote a column about summarizing the weekly news for veterans, for soldiers, so that people could cut it out and send it to their soldier over in Vietnam, and they could keep up with local news. And my mother covered the White House, and I'll show you some things about that. My parents, obviously, growing up, when we grew up in the 50s, 60s, they had gone through the Depression. My dad served in World War II with his 3 brothers. They had a pretty tough time of it. And this is a picture of their wedding. And there's something pretty telling about this picture. You might notice this is Jesu Cathedral, downtown Milwaukee. And I don't know if you notice anything. Anybody notice anything interesting about this picture?
You didn't hold the door open.
Bingo. Good job, Glenn. That very foreshadowing of a very, very difficult, rocky, long-term relationship. I mean, dude, you just got married. You should be. If I didn't hold the door open for my wife, I'd be hearing about that. My mother was the first of the true feminists, and she was actually very close friends with Gloria Steinem and some very powerful people. There's a very interesting chapter in the book about a woman named Helen Thomas, who is a very famous reporter that always used to ask the first questions. And I saw her in Washington, D.C. I was having dinner with my son, and I said, I'm going to go ask Helen Thomas if she knows my mother. My son said, oh, Dad, please don't. You always do this, Of course, I get up and I go over and I said, Miss Thomas, you remember Marion McBride? And she said, you sit down right here. And my son goes, oh. And she said, your mother and I, we fought the fight for women in journalism and against all these men and all these presidents. And your mother and I paved the way for all these powerful women of today. And she said, is that your son over there? Get him over here. I want to tell him about his grandmother. It was an amazing moment. So, sorry. But in journalism in those days, what they did was they would work hard. My dad would write 4 or 5 stories in the morning from 7 a.m. till noon. And they had the deadline they called put the paper to bed. And then the printing presses started. And I used to go and watch these big rollers, these big printing presses go. And then they would, when they meet their deadline at noon, the day wasn't done, but they would go to the bar and they'd have 2 martinis. And they'd go back to work. I mean, I don't know how you do that. I mean, obviously as a doctor, I didn't get to go do that. I finish an operation, I wouldn't go have 2 martinis, So then on the way home, they'd have a couple more, and then they'd sit at night and talk about, politics and news, and which was really powerful stuff. Every single night in our house, we talked about all the big news and all the politics. And like I say, my mom ran JFK's campaign and with Al Phillips, and I met Nixon, I met LBJ. She took us on trips. I'll show you. We grew up in a big Irish Catholic family. Whoops, just a minute, I'm going backwards here. And a little. Oh, now we're having issues here. Just a second. The button's not cooperating with me very well. We grew up in this big Irish Catholic family. There's First Communion. You remember that? This is St. Bernard's Church in Wauwatosa. And I'm hiding off in the back. In those days, the Irish Catholic schools were pretty rough, a lot of abuse. And I was in the same classroom with my twin every year until 4th grade. And every year, my assignments were compared to my twin, and I was called the dumb twin by my teachers. And they'd hold up our assignments and they'd say, look what the dumb twin did. And that really had a big impact on me. I'd get bullied and harassed in school. And so I decided I'd become the class clown, and I'd sit in the back row and, use my sense of humor. My twin is a serious, you'll see, he's a get the job done guy, and I'm a goofy character. So, I'd get straight D's in conduct, and so I doubled down on the goofy twin deal. And so I'm probably pinching somebody back there. But that's, what I thought, right? So finally it got so bad. I had such an abusive teacher in 4th grade that I developed a stress ulcer and ended up in the hospital. And my parents finally figured it out, and they raised holy hell with the Monsignor. And Sister Francis Regis. Yeah. And out, boom. We were no longer at St. Bernard's. And so here's my dad doing his work at the newspaper. He was a rewrite man and a city desk editor. And here he is meeting Hubert Humphrey. And so we were always engaged in deep political stuff and meeting people. And, when we had a birthday party, our birthday party was always at the press club. And there was always some governor, and we'd go to the governor's mansion. And so we thought, it was interesting stuff, but nobody knew what was really going on behind the doors, because every single night of my childhood, my parents were completely drunk, completely fried, and they would start arguing about politics, and those arguments turned extremely personal, and they would start screaming at each other and fighting and arguing. And so we'd go up to our rooms and try to get homework done. And I'm not exaggerating when I say every single night. And often the police were called, and they'd come over, and it got really pretty ugly. And here's my mom. This is a trip we took one time to cover Nixon's state dinner, and this is the woman in the middle is Dorothy Knowles, the wife of Governor Knowles. And so we were at this state dinner. I was with my twin brother. We were 14, and she brought my 2 younger brothers and my twin brother and I, and she said, I got work to do, so you guys stay in the hotel room. Whatever you do not leave this hotel room. And so as soon as she closed the door and went downstairs, my twin brother and I went boom, because we were not going to miss Tricky Dick. I'm going to tell you that. So we got on this escalator, and coming up the escalator is Pat Nixon and Tricia Nixon and Charles Robb, and we're like, oh my God, hey, going like this. Secret Service, we're not having, I'm telling you, we snuck into the side door of this big hall, no Secret Service there. Here's these 2 munchkins, we go in there, and I still have the red napkin. I took this red napkin off the table as a souvenir, still have it. And Nixon goes like that. And all of a sudden this waiter comes up and he goes, hey, you kids, you're not supposed to be in here. It's like, okay, we're out. But we saw him. And it wasn't long after that, he was no longer our president. Here's Kennedy. Like I say, I met Kennedy 4 times. When you meet the mayor, ask him if you met Kennedy, because being the serious guy he was, Kennedy was late and he decided to go down to kindergarten. I said, I'm staying. I'm going to meet him. So he thought I'd get in trouble with the kindergarten teacher because I was late to kindergarten. And when I got down there, she said, Pat, tell us all about meeting John F. Kennedy. Oh, he was really upset. So I stayed and I met our guy. Let me go back a minute. But the troubles really mounted. when my mother covered the 1968 convention of Hubert Humphrey running against George McGovern, was in Chicago, and Mayor Daley, there were going to be major protests about the Vietnam War. And Mayor Daley said, I don't want protests. I don't want this to be on national television. Take the press out first, get them out of here. I don't want pictures. And so my mother was there covering the convention with her photographer, and the police knocked her down, and her photographer down, broke her leg, fractured her skull. She had seizures. And seizure medication does not mix well with alcohol. So, you know, my mother used to drink a bottle of vodka every night. My father used to drink 2 bottles of wine every night. And that was the beginning of the end. I mean, things really, really got ugly when I was about 14, and that was a bad time. So it went from this happy kid that wanted to be a cowboy to a kind of a sad, sullen teenager, and trying to figure out what to do. And I'll show you my report cards here. This is Longfellow Junior High, and you know, I was doing okay in school, but you can see the straight D's in conduct there. So it was about this time, it's 1969, the year of Woodstock and all those kinds of things. The world was kind of in turmoil, you know, and I was really in turmoil. And you know, my twin brother's doing well and I'm not. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And like magic, something happened. Like they say in Field of Dream, like magic in the moonlight. The newspaper showed up one morning. I picked up the sports section, and there was an ad in the paper for a 25-word essay contest to be the first bat boy for the Milwaukee Brewers. And I thought, you know, take a shot. And I wrote an essay, and I knew Bud Selig was trying to get a team to Milwaukee. So this is the essay I wrote. I would like to be a bat boy because I would be doing a small part toward bringing baseball back to Milwaukee. I would hope the spirit I would show would be contagious. And that was exactly 25 words. And the contest, I found out later, was judged by a guy named Eddie Matthews, who some of you might remember is the star third baseman for the Milwaukee Braves. And he picked my essay out of 1,000 kids' essays. And I was the first bat boy from Milwaukee Brewers. And I showed up. And the first game that I worked at was actually an exhibition game for the Chicago Cubs. And people asked me, why are you wearing a Baltimore Orioles uniform on the cover? And it was because I got picked to be the visiting bat boy. So I worked in the visiting locker room, which was actually a really incredible experience because I met every visiting team that came through, which resulted in some incredible experiences I'll share with you. But so the first game that I worked, I go into the visiting locker room. So as a rugrat kid, you know, you run around the stadium and you get in all these, we used to get in all kinds of trouble. Your mayor used to sneak on the field and steal a rosin bag. You can tell them about that. The statute of limitations has run out, I think, Aaron. But so you know, we used to try to sneak a peek into the locker room, and they had this real tight door with a little window on it. And suddenly I'm inside, and I can tell you that when you walk into a major league locker room, even then, which was a pretty poor imitation of today, the place is beautiful. It's really stunningly beautiful. Every uniform is turned with its back on a hook, and you can read the name and the number, and they start with the biggest stars in the first locker, and then it's in reverse order. So the bat boy's in the back corner, and we're next to the rookies, and it's like this, you know. So the first locker is the big guys, and you know, Yastrzemski. So I was working for the Chicago Cubs in 1969. So if there's any big Cubs fans, you might remember 1969 was the team that was up by about 16 games in August and faded. And so anyway, the guy shows me how to put on this wool Chicago Cubs uniform, and I had to carry gigantic bat bags down. That's what I did every game. There were about 50 bats in each bag, these canvas bags, and trunks of helmets and ball bags, and get the dugout ready, drag it through a tunnel. And I look out on the field, and it literally was like Field of Dreams. I mean, the field was manicured perfectly, crisscross, cut mowed grass, and perfect chalk lines. And I'm down there all by myself. You know, I had the field all to myself. And I realized I'm standing in a dugout where Jackie Robinson stood, and Sandy Koufax, and Juan Marichal, and Stan Musial, and all of the greatest stars in the history of baseball had been in this dugout where I was standing right there in 1969, April 6, 1969. And I go to the water fountain in Milwaukee, you know, we call it a bubbler. and I'm drinking out of the bubbler, and all of a sudden I hear these spikes clicking down the tunnel on this cement. And I literally got butterflies in my stomach and my hair stood up on my arms. And I realized it's my first major league player. And I didn't know what to do. I was standing there and a guy sticks his head around the dugout like this. And he said, "Hey son, it's a great day. Let's play two." And it's Ernie Banks. I mean, Mr. Cup. I mean, when I went to Wrigley Field with my daughter when she lived in Chicago, I mean, they got a statue of it, right? And the guy says to me, "Hey son, you want to have a catch?" And I literally, I mean, my blood pressure dropped. I thought I was going to faint, So I step out in the gravel with Mr. Cup and I start playing catch and I'm shaking so bad, And he said, "Son, relax. It's just catch, And we start playing catch and we're out there all by ourselves in the stadium. I'm playing catch with Ernie Banks, the great Ernie Banks, right? And in doing research for this book, I read his biography and it turns out he had two sons. And they said, our dad used to be so exhausted by the time he got home, being so nice to everybody and being Mr. Cub. He never played catch with his sons. And I felt really sad about that when I'm in this book, right? Anyway, that day I got to see Ron Santo give himself an insulin injection when I got up in the locker room. And I mean, it was the start of seeing all these incredible guys. Later that month, the Athletics were in town and I was getting the thing ready and they had these crazy uniforms. I got a picture of it in the book. And I looked down at this picnic bench and I looked and I didn't realize that the Oakland Athletics had a coach named Joe DiMaggio. And I was like, there's Joe DiMaggio. Now, many of you might know that he was married at one point in time to a woman named Marilyn Monroe. And, I'm a 15-year-old, I'm a dumb kid. And I realized, I mean, how am I going to go talk to Joe DiMaggio? So I wander over and I say, "Excuse me, Mr. DiMaggio, could I ask you a question?" He's reading his newspaper. He's a very quiet guy. And he's very soft-spoken. And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Is it true that you leave a dozen red roses on Marilyn Monroe's grave every week?" And the guy looked at me like, "Did you really have the guts to just ask this really personal question?" I mean, this goofy kid, freckled Irish kid. And he said, "Well, yes, I do." And I said, "I think that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard in my life." And he said, "Well, thank you." And I said, "I hope someday that I meet someone that I love that much that I would do that." And the guy looks at me and he goes, "Well, thank you, son." And I said, "Could I have your autograph?" So I've got a picture of it. So you'll see it in there. It's in the book. So that summer, the new Milwaukee Bucks franchise, who had been a new franchise in '68, finished in last place. They were going to have a coin flip, and there was something back then called a transistor radio. Some of you may not remember it, that I'd won on my paper route for signing up new customers. And I had this little transistor radio, and I was listening to see if the Milwaukee Bucks were going to win the coin flip to get a guy named Lou Alcindor, who turned 75 this week. And I actually sent him an email and wished him a happy birthday. And I got an email back from him saying thank you, and because I'm still in touch with him. And there was the coin flip, and I listened, and they won the coin flip, and suddenly they're going to get Lou Alcindor. So I thought, well, shoot, I'm going to call up the Bucks office. So I went to our alcove, and I grabbed something called the Yellow Pages, which when I talk to kids, I talked to a high school recently, Burlington High School, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And I looked up the Milwaukee Bucks in the Yellow Pages, and then I dialed on our rotary phone, which 15-year-old kids don't know how to dial a rotary phone anymore. And I called the Bucks office, and they were celebrating, which I didn't know. And I talked to the woman on the phone. I said, "How do you get to be a ball boy?" And she said, "Well, it's amazing, but we're interviewing tomorrow." And they hadn't advertised. They were just taking phone calls. And about 200 kids had called up and asked. And so I went on the 31 bus. I paid $0.25 and went down Wisconsin Avenue, and I interviewed, and I got picked to be on the Milwaukee Bucks bench So Lou Alcindor and I started our careers with the Bucks and at the same time. And I think he had a better career than I did, but that summer I also worked really hard at the stadium. I figured, I really want to keep this job. I don't know how I'm going to work beyond this year. So everywhere I went at the stadium, I never walked. In fact, all 7 years that I worked for the Bucks and the Brewers, I never walked one time. I didn't walk 10 feet. I always sprinted everywhere I went. I got known for doing this. So I would sprint from locker room to locker room to the office. I never, so I was always dripping in sweat, and I was kind of known for that. So the clubhouse guy said to me, "Hey, how would you like to work for me this fall?" And I didn't know what he's talking about, but he said, "I'm in charge of the Green Bay Packer games in Milwaukee County Stadium." They used to play 5 games in Milwaukee County Stadium. The Packers had just won the first 2 Super Bowls a couple of years earlier. So, I was a Green Bay Packer maniac, so I said, "God, I would love to do that." So the next thing you know, I was working for 3 professional sports teams, and I'm 15 years old. And I'm the only kid in America that's ever had that privilege to work for 3 professional sports teams. So I went from a kid that was living in a household with 6 other siblings, with 2 parents who were really hopeless alcoholics, who both died of their alcoholism, that was in constant noise with police coming over on a frequent basis and kids making fun of us, to suddenly having the greatest jobs in the world. And I can tell you an interesting story that it wasn't really about the stars. I'll tell you about that. So here I am pictured, whoops. Let me get to that picture. Here I am pictured at the stadium. I'm the kid with the big nose there, 4th from the left in the plaid jacket. And here I am in a Milwaukee Brewers uniform with big glasses. And the other thing I didn't realize is that you get to be in team pictures with players. I took my son to a card show one time. They would hand these out at oldies nights and, the radio shows and stuff. I took my kid to a card show one time, and I honestly had never figured this out, but I was looking through some baseball cards. I had some old cards, and I was wondering what they were worth. And I said, "Do you have any old Brewers team picture cards?" And he said, "Oh yeah, gosh, I got a bunch of them. They're not worth anything." Because Brewers weren't very good when I was there. And I said, "Oh my gosh, here I am pictured on a baseball card." And this guy at the card show goes, "You're on a baseball card?" Oh my God. I said, "Yeah, this is me right here." And the guy went crazy, I didn't play. And it's like, not a big of a deal. But he was bananas, and he starts going through all these cards, and he gives me a bunch of cards, So I'm on a baseball card, which for what it's worth, I can tell you, taking care of sick patients is a lot more important than that, which is one of the things I learned. But, I was part of this coin flip, as I mentioned. So here I am with the slide will move here. Here I am with Kareem. And of course, in my scrapbook, I'd write little things like that. Me, you're 16, you don't, but when it's Kareem. So I remember the first time that Kareem showed up and by the way, he had changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1968 when he was at UCLA, but he didn't announce it because he was close friends with Muhammad Ali. And after all the issues that Muhammad Ali went through, he kind of held off in the announcement. And he, first time he walked into the locker room, he, the door opened and there's this guy who folds over like this. And opened the door and this guy stood up. I mean, everybody in the locker room just looked, it's just, and there's 3 people that I would tell you are the most misunderstood athletes that I ever met. And that would be Ted Williams, who is one of the nicest guys in the locker room that I ever met. Just superb to us as kids, would teach us a lot of things. And he just didn't like the press because he felt he was unfairly treated by the press. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who inside the locker room was warm, highly intelligent, a gentleman, always said please and thank you, just terrific person. There's a number of people like that where to us, what the thing that I learned, what I thought as a kid, the greatest lesson that I learned was that I thought I was going to be enamored by the stars, by the numbers. This guy hit 500 home runs. This guy has a batting average of 400. 5 minutes, you learn it doesn't matter at all. Willie Mays is not a nice person, you know. This person is not a nice person. They treated us like dirt. It's how people treated us that really matter. So it's the people that said please and thank you, because I worked 12 hours days while I was at these places. So I'd get there at 2 PM and get home at 1 or 2 AM because we were doing laundry and doing the cleaning the locker room and serving food and running errands. And, you know, I'd have to ride my bike there between 15 and 16 until I got a motorcycle, you know, and we were getting paid $5 or $10 a game for that. They broke I needed you. And they were breaking all the child labor laws, you know. So it was how we were treated that mattered. And that was a really powerful lesson. You know, I learned I wanted to be like this and not like that. That was the first powerful lesson. You know, that was going to be the message of my book until my lawyer twin brother got a hold of me. So here I am in 1971 with the world champion Bucks. The coach on the left actually just went into the Hall of Fame, and his kids called me up and asked me to be there for him because I worked really hard to help get Coach Costello into the Hall of Fame because he's a really deserving guy. After we unpacked every football team, like I mentioned, I worked in the visiting locker room. So here's the Bears. I'm not a Bears fan at all. But here I am wearing Gail Sayers' uniform. So we would pick one uniform and so the guy'd say, okay, pick the uniform, put it on, then we'll get a picture. So this is Gail Sayers' uniform, which I think is pretty cool. Yeah, that's the actual uniform. What's that? Oh, yeah. Well, Gail Sayers was a small, pretty shifty. You know, I was 6'3" at the time. So, yeah. If I turned sideways and stuck up my tongue, I looked like a zipper, but I was 6'3". So as I mentioned in those days, I mean, things are completely different. You know, we would get there. I had to rearrange my work schedule. You know, I already knew how to work hard. I was working 3 jobs between the age of 12 and 15. I was scooping ice cream at Baskin Robbins and doing a paper route, and, you know, doing mowing lawns and raking leaves and things like that. Because starting at age 12 in our family, every kid had to pay for themselves. So after age 12, I never got 10 cents from my parents, not a penny. So I paid for all my books, all my clothes, all my school fees, everything, not anything. My parents did not give us anything. So, you know, I started looking for jobs. So, you know, this is the way I did it, you know, and I'd have to save up. But this is what we did at these games. You know, we'd clean the locker room and we'd prepare the locker room, we'd prepare the court, make the Gatorade, do all that kind of stuff. It was quite a bit of work, you know. So when I'd get home at 1 or 2 in the morning, my parents were in bed and they never asked, you know, what time did you get home? You know, I'd have to figure out how to do my homework around, you know, sometimes I'd study it right after halftime, or I'd go into the equipment room and study, or I'd study from 1 to 2 in the morning, or, you know, mostly study halls is what I did, you know. But, you know, I'd be standing on the corner of 6th and Wisconsin at 1:30 in the morning waiting for the bus. You know, it's pretty crazy stuff. You know, Dan, you know what that was like in 1969. You know, it's pretty nuts. But there were some rewards, you know, like this was a playoff bonus. Players would vote us a playoff bonus. So I got $1,000 in 74. And in 1975, the players voted me a full share because they knew I was going to medical school. So that was a big highlight. But then something really tragic happened. This is a picture of a guy named Ed Goodwin. He was the equipment manager in 1971. He had 3 kids. And I got a phone call from my dad. My dad said, Ed Goodwin died. It's very typical of my dad. He's a very Russian era reporter. And I said, what? And he said, Ed Goodwin died. And Ed Goodwin was my boss, equipment manager of the Bucks, 55 years old. And I was friends with his kids. I played basketball with his kids. One of his kids played at UW-Whitewater and played in Europe. And I said, well, what happened? You know, I know it was a car accident. He said, no, he dropped dead. You know, it's like, geez, I start crying. And my dad says, why are you crying? This is what he'd say to me all the time. It's like, when my grandfather died, he'd say this. You know, I'd say, Dad, you know, he's my boss, you know. And I said, never mind, you know, and I hung up and I called the Bucks office and I said, the trainer answered and I said, you know, what happened to Mr. Goodwin, and they said he died of a heart attack. And I said, well, what's going to happen with his kids? And they said, well, we started scholarship funds. They're all taken care of. And they said, let me just put you on with the general manager. So the general manager was a guy named Wayne Embry, the first African American general manager in professional sports history. Amazing guy, one of my mentors. And he said he wants to talk to you. And I said, well, Mr. Embry, what are we going to do for an equipment manager? And they said, we have somebody picked out, and he used to call me Irish. And he said, Irish, we think you can do the job. I was 17 years old, and I was going into my senior year of high school. And I said, I'm a senior in high school. And he said, we think you can do the job. Are you up for it? And I, had hesitated a second. I said, well, yes, sir, I think I can. He said, okay, well, we do too. He said, come on down to the office. So I got on the bus and I went down to the office, and I became the youngest equipment manager in professional sports history. There's never been anybody under the age of 21. So here I am, a 17-year-old kid, nervous as can be. Made a few mistakes, I can tell you that. But I had $100,000 budget ordering uniforms and working with, dealers and doing all that stuff. But I got my feet under me, and here I am the next year, feeling more confident and doing my thing. And then here I am, I hired my younger brother to work with me. My younger brother on the left now is the Dean of Public Health at Washington University. So he's doing well. And then here I am as the visiting bat boy, got to wear all the different uniforms. This is the great Baltimore Oriole team that had 420 game winners, Pat Dobson, Mike Quare, Dave McNally, all those characters. Here I am in that Oakland Athletics uniform where I went to ask the great Joe DiMaggio for the Marilyn Monroe autograph. The interesting follow-up to that, my oldest brother, Joe, is a well-known film historian and author. He's written over 25 books, just wrote a book on the Coen brothers and Billy Wilder. And he was driving me through Hollywood one time on a trip to visit him. And he said, oh, here's where Marilyn Monroe's buried. And I said, oh, I'd really like to see her grave. Well, she's buried in this crypt. And she'd been dead for quite a while. And Joe DiMaggio was dead. And I went over to see the grave, and there were a dozen red roses by her grave. And I said, oh my God. And he said, yeah, he put it in his will that she would have the dozen red roses delivered every week. That's how much he loved Marilyn Monroe. So my wife said, you better get busy rewriting to him. But I have this incredible autograph book of people like Will Chamberlain, and Pistol Pete died suddenly, as you know, at age 39. And he had a congenital abnormality of his heart. And he used to sit in the locker room after games. He wouldn't leave for about 2 or 3 hours because there'd be lines of women outside the arena waiting to see him. And so I would sit in the locker room and tell the other kids to go home because I was the boss, and say, I'll sit with them. And we'd sit and talk basketball for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, those are some of the fun things that I used to get to do. And here's my favorite autograph. This is a per diem envelope of Joe Namath. This is the year after he predicted the Super Bowl win, against the NFL. And so he came in. The only football players that would talk to us would either be quarterbacks or punters. The rest of the guys were so jacked up, they wouldn't speak to us. They were just like, football. The difference between the three sports is really striking. So basketball players all had college educations in the day that I worked there. So you couldn't come out as a freshman, or, you had to graduate from college. So at the basketball locker room, guys were sitting around reading books, listening to jazz, playing chess, doing different things. Baseball, they were all doing pranks. They were giving each other hot foots, or putting balm in jocks, or cutting off each other's shorts, or a bunch of knuckle. And the football players, you couldn't talk to them. They were nuts. They were just so jacked up for a game, you couldn't even speak to them. I mean, they were just pounding each other or walking around in their underwear. It was just bizarre. But Joe Namath was particularly very friendly. So he tossed this envelope down after he took his meal money out of it. And I said, Mr. Namath, would you mind signing an autograph? And he said, what's your name, son? And he wrote this beautiful autograph, Pat, good luck, pal, Joe Namath. So it's one of my favorite autographs. So this is a picture of me outside the Bucks locker room. This was a young kid, drew this for us, a young kid dying of leukemia. And I made him a official ball boy for us. He's a little guy, Timmy. And I got him a shirt, and he used to sit at the end of the bench. And one game, his dad showed up all alone, and he had passed. And So I wrote my medical school essay about this kid and his dad. I interviewed his dad and I wrote an essay. And so after this, I went on to medical school. I realized, the trainer had said to me, I said, I want to be an athletic trainer. He said, you're not going to be an athletic trainer. I said, I'd like to be an athletic trainer. And he said, you're too smart to be an athletic trainer. And that's the first time anybody had ever said that to me. And, I said, what am I going to do? He said, you're going to medical school. And I said, I am. And he said, I want to see your grades every quarter. And I want to see your report card. And he said, I want to see 3.5 or better. And the same thing happened to me at the baseball stadium. The guy said, I want to see your report card every quarter. I think they got in cahoots. And my grades went. And I got into medical school. I was able to do some really great things. This is Mr. Rogers' favorite guest, a young man named Jeffrey Erlanger. You're from the Madison area. He was a councilman. And if you Google YouTube, Mr. Rogers' favorite guest, this kid will come up. At 39, he was a councilman, Madison City Councilman, but they sing a song together, and he gave Mr. Rogers his Lifetime Achievement Award. His dad called me and said, Jeffrey would like to meet his favorite player, who's the guy on the right, Mark Brohard. So I took him down to meet, I arranged a meeting between them, and guys like Robin Yellen and all these guys were extremely nice to Jeffrey, but it was a wonderful memory. And so I got to do some really incredible things over my career. So I learned over time, just to wrap up, it's really, for me, it was not about sports. It was about these people that inspired me. It was about learning good manners. It was about learning what mattered. It was learning about please and thank you and hard work and what got you to where you were. So this is what this is what counted. So this is my mentor at the stadium, a guy named Jim Kaczynski. We called him Big Jim. Sent me an email today and said, so I've gotten together with these guys every year of my life. And they keep checking in on me and making sure I'm doing the right thing. And they keep me on the straight and narrow. And I'm just going to tell you a real quick story about that. I was 16 years old. It was my second year, and baseball players swear like basketball players do not, but baseball players swear like you can't believe it. And I dropped a couple of F-bombs in the locker room, and Big Jim pulled me aside and he said, I said, come on over here a minute. And he said, I want you to go home. And he said, I want you to think about what you just did. And he said, you're not a baseball player. He said, I want you to grow up to be a normal human being. And he said, we don't talk like that in here. He said, baseball players might, but we don't. And he said, so you're going to go home for 3 days. And he said, when you come back, he said, I want you to talk like a normal human being. If you ever talk like that again, you'll never work like that. You'll never work in here again. And I went home. I was so scared that I'd lost my job. Let me tell you something. I never dropped a word like that again in my life. This guy changed my life. So when Mr. Rogers said, when you're in trouble, find the helpers. These are the helpers. So there's Larry Costello, who's going in the Hall of Fame. There's the trainer that told me I was going to medical school. There's John McLaughlin that wrote the foreword. These are the helpers. That's what changed my career. So I think I'll stop here and just let you know that the luck that I have, it's Lou Burdett, a pitcher for the Braves, said, I'd rather be lucky than good. And that's what I tell you happened for me. It was just being in the right place at the right time and having good role models and good mentors. So thank you for what you do for people, your broad stand work and all the work you do. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have. So thank you for your attention. And here's my last mentor here, Mr. Embry. Whoops, if it'll change.
All right. Well, I know we're a little over on time.
Okay.
So we may close out the meeting just because I'm not sure how long we have the room for. There might be other things going. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll close the meeting then, but you guys can stay if Pat is willing to as well. All right, to answer questions. So thank you again, Pat, for speaking to us. That is such an amazing story. And in your honor and in honor of all of our speakers, we actually make a donation to End Polio Now Fund of the Rotary International to help the efforts to eradicate polio. Next week is our annual meeting for the Madison South Rotary Foundation. So make sure you're all there, and I will see you guys.
Changing the guard by tomorrow.
Sign up by tomorrow. Dan will resend
We'll send
the
it out
link.
separate.
So make sure you sign up for that by tomorrow. Oh, books for sale. All right. See you guys later.
Thanks.